Hey there, and welcome back to another Genshin Impact character review. Today, we're taking a look at Albedo, one of the first characters, limited characters that came around because he was released with Dragonspine around, 1.1? He has been kind of like tied into the Christmas character, but MiHoYo loves to break traditions and they released him, they made his second rerun before Christmas, which was very weird because I was expecting to roll for Albedo during Christmas, but hey, Albedo is a 5-star sword Geo character, and he is a fantastic sub DPS character, but because he is Geo, he is pretty limited by it, and he kind of doesn't have that much versatility as other sub DPS characters of any other element really. And also because his kit contains split scaling, lots of players basically ignore half of his kit because they consider it not dealing enough damage. We'll see how that works once we get into his kit. In my opinion, I believe that Albedo is a very good sub DPS character. I definitely don't see him as a must-have character, but he's nice to have in your account to sometimes slot as a flex character in a team. And he also really nicely completes double Geo characters, double Geo compositions. When you have Zhongli and you're like, I have Zhongli, some other, and 2 other characters, and you're like, I have this 4th flex slot. What the heck I'm gonna do with it? Many a times in those situations, I'm like, I wish I had Albedo right now. Just an easy to complete double Geo composition as a flex character with Zhongli. But let's get into his kit and see where any sort of problems lie with Albedo. We're gonna skip his auto attacks because the only comment that I can make there is that his auto attacks have beautiful animations, but because they are not a core part of his kit, we're gonna skip them. But again, really nice animations, especially for an early 5-star sword character, because I don't remember those early 5-star sword characters having that interesting animations on their auto attacks. Nevertheless, let's get into his skill. So, Albedo's skill is his Solaris Otoma, I think it's called. It works as the same as Ito's Ushi, where you can tap the skill to place the Solaris Otoma at a range from Albedo where he's looking, or you can hold it to more precisely place the skill. Usually in combat, you'll just tap it, and you'll hold it usually in the overworld if you're not trying to specifically place the Solaris Otoma to cheese some sort of puzzle, because when characters step on the Solaris Otoma, it will create another flower that rises up and can be used as a platform to again skip puzzles, like, break the terrain basically. In combat, it's not useful because even with somebody like Xiao that has really high plunge attack damage, it's not worth it to waste your time waiting for the flower to come up and then plunge attack off of it. So it's pretty useless in combat, but again, in the overworld, it's really useful to cheese the terrain or help you climb a mountain by skipping a lot of it because of the Solaris Otoma. Nevertheless, the Solaris Otoma creates a field where, when it's first placed, it will deal a bit of damage, but the big one is when enemies are in the field and are attacked by some sort of attack from other characters or abilities, they are hit by these explosions that deal a percentage of Albedo's death in damage, and that damage is a lot of damage actually. And yeah, that's about it. The field, the Solaris Otoma, lasts 30 seconds, which is a freaking ton, and the cooldown is around 8 seconds, so it's really crazy to have this huge duration and low cooldown. It really helps with like displacing Albedo's flower if it breaks because it's a Geo construct, and it's absolutely fragile against the bosses and big enemies because we are not gonna recode Geo constructs to make them better, huh, MiHoYo? But if enemies run away from the field, you can easily just put it down again, which is nice. That's a good thing about the low cooldown and the high duration. You just completely forget about the flower. It will last any sort of rotation that you need to do. It will 100% last that long when you need to get back to Albedo for your rotation. And that's really the skill. It's a really good skill. It deals a lot of damage. As for Albedo's burst, I think it's called something like Tectonic Rights and the subtitle thingy. But basically, Albedo creates like this like thingy, this like earthquake, I guess. Like he makes these geo like rocks form, and then they explode, dealing a good amount of damage. But also, if you cast the burst within a Solaris Automa field, you will also create additional explosions. I think some of them are random, and some of them do lock onto enemies, so they do work like Ayato and Ganyu's burst, where if there are lots of enemies grouped up, the explosions will deal damage to all of the enemies, so they kind of have this pseudo-quadratic scaling. Unfortunately, because the burst scales with attack, and Albedo usually doesn't build attack, lots of players just skip the burst. They just ignore it. But I do believe that it is finally worth to use the burst every now and then. Some people will definitely call it a waste of field time for Albedo, but I do believe that it is a fine amount of damage even without any sort of attack building. And again, it's nice damage with low cost as well. I think it's like 40 energy, so it will come up even without that much ER. Also, Albedo's second Ascension talent ties into the burst, where whenever you cast the burst, you give an elemental mastery buff on your whole party, which in certain situations can be really, really useful. If you're running Kazuha with Albedo, that extra EM on Kazuha is very useful, because compared to somebody like Sucrose, which cannot buff Kazuha because they have this specific rule, Albedo can. Albedo can buff Kazuha, which is nice. And other characters like Vape teams really love the Elemental Mastery, of course. Other reaction teams really love the Elemental Mastery buff. So again, I think that every now and then casting Albedo's Burst isn't that bad. Like, I don't think it's a waste of field time every now and then. And the damage it deals is nice. So yeah, I hate this idea of if the ability isn't that useful, never use it. In some situations, sure, but in Albedo's situation, I don't see that as a valid rule to not use his burst. Don't build towards it, sure, but don't completely forget about it. Right, level it up a bit, it can deal a good amount of damage, and that's good scaling. Do level it up, don't leave it on level 1 and just raise his skill. But yeah, that's the base kit. For his first Ascension passive, because I didn't mention it, is that his Solaris Automa explosions deal extra damage to enemies that are below 50% health, which is nice and welcome. You'll see abilities like that on like constellations. I think like Diluc has a constellation like that. So it's nice to see it as a Ascension talent, because that's nice, I guess. As for artifacts, then, for Albedo, since we're done with this kit, I guess let's take a look at constellations also. Albedo doesn't have any really crazy constellations, the only one being his C2. His C2 is that Albedo gains these stacks every now and then, I think from explosions from his Solaris Automa, that add defense scaling onto his burst. So it's a really big constellation to nullify the split scaling and finally add defense scaling onto Albedo's burst. It is a very good constellation, and you basically just stop at C2 if you want to invest in Albedo. Unless you have the money to go for a C6, C2 is the perfect constellation. And while you're at it, you're gonna get his C1, which is some extra elemental particles, which is nice. It's not crazy, it's not worth going for his C1, but if you're sure that you're gonna go for his C2, then it's a good constellation to have. But yeah, C2 ignores the split scaling, adds the def scaling to Albedo's burst, and is very, very welcome. But you know, you might need to change up how you use Albedo, because it has a weird way of how you get these stacks, and you need to have max stacks before you use Albedo's burst. So you might want to look into it. But again, his C2 is the most useful one. And then let's go on to artifact sets. Albedo has one artifact set that is good. It is Husk of Opulent Dreams, and I think you already knew about this. It is Def, and also Geo Damage plus Def on the 4-piece effect. It's Albedo's best artifact set by a huge mile. By a really big mile. Like, don't use anything else. As a temporary solution, I can see a 2-piece Husk of Opulent Dreams and a 2-piece Archaic Petra, just for the Geo Damage bonus, until you get a full Husk of Opulent Dreams set. That's the only reason I can see you like using a 2-piece and a 2-piece. But most of the time, just use Husk of Opulent Dreams, even if you don't have like the best stats. Even if you don't have a crit circlet, use Def. Like, just use it. Just have Husk of Opulent Dreams. As for artifact stats, Def is your sense. Don't use an attack sense. Use Def. use geo damage as your goblet, and then a crit rate or crit damage circlet. That's it. Try to get your best crit rate ratio, crit ratio. 50 to 150 is really the goal, but it's definitely difficult to get since Albedo doesn't have a crit ascension stat. He has geo damage, so it can be very difficult to reach a 50 to 150 ratio. So try your best, but Husk of Opulent Dreams, use Death Sands, maybe use an attack sense if you just want to use Husk of Opulent Dreams, but geo damage and then Death or crit for your circlet if you again need to have a Husk of Opulent Dreams without the best main stats. But yeah, Death, Geo, and Crit is your main stats. But yeah, Husk of Opulent Dreams, like there's nothing else you can use that best suits Albedo. As for team compositions, Albedo just slots into everything as I mentioned at the start, but he's limited by the Geo Resonance. The Geo Resonance boosts Albedo's damage by so much, it is insane. Like, it's not even worth comparing to non-Geo Resonance teams. Geo Resonance is just amazing. And that's it. Like, I'd love to have Albedo as just a flexed sub-DPS, but this restriction is really big. Like, his damage skyrockets because of the Geo Resonance. And his best buddies are Zhongli and Goro. Zhongli because he has the shield shred, one of the only ways to reduce geo resistance is Zhongli's shield, so he's one of the best companions for Albedo. And the other one is Goro, because Goro offers death buffing, and also he can also give geo crit damage. Not just geo damage, geo crit damage, which is one of the best buffs for Albedo. Those are Albedo's two best buddies. But Goro doesn't fit into many teams as Zhongli, so most of the time it's Zhongli and Albedo that you'll see together as a double Geo party in any sort of team composition. The best one is, of course, Zhongli, Hu Tao, Xingqiu Yellen, and Albedo. It's the Hu Tao double Geo. It isn't as good as a double Hydro Hu Tao, but it's also it doesn't lag that much behind, and it's nice to play, And like, you don't need to care about Yellen's energy recharge. I mean, of course you're running two Hydros, but still, right? You don't need, like, Albedo is really easy to build compared to Yellen, because Yellen runs Emblem of Severed Fate, and like 50 characters need Emblem of Severed Fate, so it might be harder with artifacts, like that sort of thing. Like, yes, double Hydro Hu Tao deals more damage, but double Geo Hu Tao is also one of Hu Tao's best teams, and it's easy to play. And yeah, those are the teams. You're most likely gonna see Zhongli and Albedo, and then somebody else, some other two characters, just usually some sort of carries that like the extra damage from the Geo Resonance, and like Zhongli's shield. And as for Goro and Albedo, you'll most likely see them in something like Ningyan Goro and Albedo, or Noel Goro and Albedo, or of course Ito Goro and Albedo. The triple Geo thingy with Goro. Ningyan doesn't benefit from death scale, from the death buffing from Goro, but she likes the Geo crit damage. That's the only time you're gonna use Goro with Ningyan. But Noel, of course, and Ito are death scalers. It's the classic four mono Geo team, and Albedo, of course, is always in there because of his fantastic sub DPSing. But also Albedo can make some good crystallize. Like, yes, crystallize is shit, but with the amount of procs that Albedo does with his Solaris Automa, you really like make a lot of crystallized shields, which can nicely protect you from some hits from the enemies. So this is nice to have. This is also a nice thing to have Albedo in, right? People don't use like Tenacity of the Millilith. Right, I can see the argument of, isn't Albedo easy to proc Tenacity of the Millilith? It's not worth wasting Albedo sub-DPS to get the Tenacity of Millilith buff. Like, Husk of Opulent Dreams, please. But yeah, that's the problem with Albedo and team compositions. He can fit into many teams, it's just there needs to be another Geo character to help with the Geo Resonance and make Albedo fully shine. That's the thing. And then we go on to weapons for Albedo, which is Albedo's biggest problem. while the geo-resonance thing is a limiting factor, but you can sometimes skip it, this is the big one. Weapons for Albedo. Albedo's best weapon is Cinnabar Spindle, but Cinnabar Spindle is a limited event weapon, which means that if you didn't play during that time, you don't have that weapon. So, and because it's Albedo's best in slot, this is the big problem, because other weapons don't deal as much damage as Cinnabar Spindle. So new players that roll for Albedo are completely fucked. So unless MiHoYo introduces a way to get those limited time weapons, which I hope they do sometime in the future, this is the big problem with rolling for Albedo. Albedo's second weapon that fits him is Harbinger of Dawn. Because it's a 3-star weapon, it has low base attack, but that doesn't matter because Albedo scales off of death. And Harbinger of Dawn's stat is that it has a crit substat, and then it gives you crit rate when you're above 90% HP. Because Albedo is constantly off the field and most of the time is protected by a crystallized shield or Zhongli shield, even if he appears for 2 seconds on the field, he isn't gonna take damage or fall below 90% HP. But the problem is, we have the dogs, right? If you are going up against the dogs with corrosion or some sort of corrosion effect in the Abyss or in the Overworld, you're fucked if you're using Harbinger of Dawn. If Harbinger of Dawn's effect doesn't trigger, its damage absolutely falls to the bottom. So that's big problem with Harbinger of Dawn compared to Cinnabar Spindle. Cinnabar Spindle doesn't have this problem. And the only other weapons that Albedo uses are 5-star weapons, those being Jade Cutter because of its crit rate, and Mist Splitter because of the elemental damage buff and the crit damage. But they also do not deal as much damage as Cinnabar Spindle, far from it. So yeah, that's again the big problem with Albedo weapons. Everything else is not usable. Everything else it doesn't work. Favonius for extra energy? No. Albedo's damage absolutely dips to below sea level with any other weapon, no matter what it is. Only Harbinger of Dawn because of its crit stats, and the other 5-star weapons because of their crit stats and to some extent effects. But Cinnabar Spindle is just the best one, and there's no way to go around it. So yeah, that's the biggest problem with Albedo, and why many people do not go for Albedo, because they don't have Cinnabar Spindle. So again, I really hope that we get a way to get these limited 5-star weapons, because in some characters, especially Albedo, they make that much of a difference. Until they make a specific 5-star weapon for Albedo, or we get a way to get these limited weapons, Albedo sits on this weird spot of, do you have Cinnabar Spindle? Do you maybe have Jade Cutter and are willing to lower Albedo's damage? Then get him. Then yeah, get him or not get him, right? It's a big problem. And of course, are you gonna use the 4 Geo team? Are you gonna use Ningyan? Are you gonna go with some sort of double Geo composition with Zhongli? These are, again, big limiting factors for Albedo. But to be honest, I just really like him. That's the reason why I wanted to have him. Also, he was actually the only male character that I didn't have. That's something. But yeah, that's it for Albedo. Fantastic sub DPS. Again, if you see his damage, it's insane. On the 4 Geo team, where you have the Geo Resonance and Goro, his skill can reach up to 40,000 damage per proc? It's insane. But even with just the Geo Resonance, he deals almost 30,000 damage per proc if it crits. But the biggest problem isn't that he is limited to the Geo Resonance. Lots of people run Zhongli, and they nicely have some room for Albedo. The biggest problem is weapons, and that's the big problem. And also, another thing I want to ask you, is there a character in Genshin that you guys really like their burst voice lines? Because for me, Albedo is one of them. Albedo and Kazuha, for some reason, are the characters that I really, really like their burst voice lines. Xingqiu was before them, but I just really like Albedo's voice lines. I really like Albedo as a character. He's very interesting, of course. But yeah, Kazuha and Albedo, I for some reason always like to quote their voice lines whenever I use their bursts. I don't know, but I don't know if you guys have these characters, but again, I really like their voice lines. Nevertheless, that's it for me for Albedo. Next up is most likely Scaramouche, so we are gonna take a break for the character reviews for a patch, because 3.2 is coming and they doesn't have any characters that I like. We're gonna wait for 3.3 because that's when Scaramouche comes in, and it seems that AL-Haitham might be in 3.4, so that's gonna be really nice. But yeah, that's it for me. We still have some of the main events to review, Spiral Abysses as well. We're not getting any new areas in Sumeru, so that's sad. But I'm still gonna do, of course, the main event reviews and also the Spiral Abyss reviews, of course. So I'll wait for those and some other videos to come out. So that's it for me. See you in another video. Goodbye.